Hey, hey, welcome back to another episode of the She's Making an Impact podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Ngom. Today is for the impact maker. If you have just a burning desire in your heart of wanting to create an impact in the world, this is for you. Okay, so I have brought on Nancy Economou. She is the founder, CEO of Watts of Love. The recipient of the 2024 Red Cross Global Citizenship Award. She's the leader, CEO, inventor, and public speaker. She's the founder and CEO of Watts of Love, a global nonprofit with a mission to break the cycle of poverty through financial literacy and solar light to the nearly 1 billion people living without electricity. Nancy identified a surprising and simple solution to end poverty. She designed and patented a unique, durable, and long-lasting solar light with an education model that teaches how this light is the key to unlocking self-worth and financial freedom. Watts of Love shows third world communities how the solar light and financial literacy training can alleviate poverty in one generation. So I found Nancy. She actually came and taught at my school, the Global School of Supernatural Ministry. And as she was talking, I'm like, oh, I love everything she's saying. Like, I've lived abroad, lived in Africa, and like all these things. And then she's like, oh, and I'm also live in Downers Grove, Illinois, which is like down the street from where I grew up. So I'm like, all right, I shot her a Facebook message. I'm like, Nancy, we got to get this scheduled. So she came, we had this scheduled for probably 2 months ago. And 5 minutes before we're supposed to do this interview, my entire, like, if I think it was either our entire area or like our whole city lost power. And I'm like trying to reach out to Nancy, and she's like, well, that's what I do, right? Like, I bring light and bring electricity to people. And I'm like, well, funny story that so we had to reschedule, but now we finally got it on, and I'm so excited for you to hear. Just her. Hey, Nancy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm excited. Let's dive in. Tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
Absolutely. So I'm the founder of Watts of Love and started that back in 2013. My background had nothing to do with what I'm doing now. Right? Isn't that what God does with us? My background was in high-end jewelry sales here in Chicago for Cartier. So I say I went from serving the top 1% of the world to now serving the bottom 1% of the world. In 94, I got married and started having children. And at that time, decided to be a stay-at-home mom. I felt like that's where God was calling me. Was home, started having 5 children. I had 5 boys. And in 2009, I had the opportunity to go to the Philippines. And, at that time in my life was really challenging. I was married, and my ex-husband, my now ex-husband, was in real estate. So at that point, we had gone, lost all of our money because he was in real estate. I had found out some things in my marriage that were not okay. I can tell you, as a woman, a stay-at-home mom of 5 boys, found myself in this position, and it was probably the lowest point of my life. But I went to the Philippines just trusting God, like, okay, God, like, I just felt compelled to go, and I can't explain it. But when I was there, I went to a feeding program where I was there with these young children, and one of the girls, her face was all burnt, and the teachers were putting toothpaste on her face. And I, just looked at the teachers. I said, well, what happened to her? And why is her face burnt? And why are you putting toothpaste? And I had so many questions, and they said, oh, this happens all the time. Children are burnt because they don't have lighting. So they use kerosene and candles. So as an American, that was something I had never seen before. And what I can tell you is I came back from that trip and felt like Holy Spirit was like, I want you to bring lights, solar lights to people. And so after a few years kind of thinking about Watts of Love, dreaming about Watts of Love, I didn't want to get to the end of my life and God say to me, I gave you two paths. Number one, these 5 amazing sons, stay-at-home mother, which is a fabulous decision to make. And then another path, I gave you these 5 sons, you're an amazing mother, and this not-for-profit. One's not right or wrong, they're just 2 very different outcomes. And so I just really trusted God that he laid this desire on my heart, that he was going to find a way through some of my dark situations in my personal life, but really have an impact on me, my sons, and then the world.
Amazing. Okay, so we had the idea in 2009. When did this idea actually turn into Lots of Love?
Lots of steps, lots of laundry and children in between there. So I kind of activated myself by just talking about it, like, and starting to just believe that this could be an impact. And I'm going to share kind of a story that happened, because I think we all have moments in our life that are marker moments. And there was a marker moment for me to be activated. And that was in 2012. This is years later. I had the jewelry background, and I was still kind of selling jewelry a little bit from home. And a woman had come to my house who I didn't know. She was trying to sell an engagement ring and was asking me for help. So we were talking. She was sharing, like, she had started a big company, and it was, very fancy. Of course, I'm a stay-at-home mom, hadn't worked in years. And I said, well, I have a dream, and it's called Lots of Love. And I believe we're going to bring solar lights to people, and just spoke it out. And she was leaving my house, and she turned and looked at me, and she said, you have been given that dream for a reason. Don't give up on it. And when she walked out, I felt like I got slapped in the face. Like, it was just a wake up, like, you know what? I will be held accountable for these desires in my heart, to take a step. And so I think we get very overwhelmed because I had this big global vision. But how do you take those first few, because it's 1,000 steps to get to where I am today. But what are those first few steps? And so, okay, I'm going to register the name with the state of Illinois. And I just would take the smallest step that I could imagine. And that's just really how I started it. And I think as an entrepreneur, as a visionary, it's very easy to get overwhelmed with your vision. And how am I going to do this? And well, you don't have to worry about any of those problems if you don't, start taking those first steps. So it was just step by step that I started Lots of Love. And I think it's that empowering yourself, speaking out your vision. And then, I started speaking to pastors and different people in the Philippines. And what happened as I started to share, like, doors just started opening and popping. And when we follow what God is blessing, right? So maybe I'd open up 2 or 3 doors, and one, you could just feel a flow. The other ones, there was resistance. And I'm not saying sometimes we have to push through resistance, but just staying in tune to what God is blessing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so God started opening these different doors. When did things start to take off?
Well, I'll tell you, there was an awareness for me. So in 2013, I decided to go back to the Philippines because that's where my heart was transformed. And I didn't know how to do this. I had shared with this pastor that I wanted to come and bring lights. And he said, Nancy, I'm on this remote island, which when I first met him, he was in Manila, which has electricity. And he said, I've been moved to this remote island. It's like living 2,000 years ago. I mean, there's never been a doctor. It was primitive, okay? And so I thought, okay, great. Like here I've got customers on this remote island. I have access in because I wasn't sure how I was going to find people who needed the lights. So I think I was naive enough to be like, okay, I'm going to order 1,000 solar lights and I'm going to ship them to Manila. And like, international shipping is not the easiest thing. But I thought, okay, if this is God, I'm going to just figure it out along the way. And I think as an entrepreneur, you have to just be comfortable being uncomfortable and not knowing all of the outcomes. So get to the Philippines. I, found myself on this little bamboo banca boat going across the South China Sea to this crazy little remote island. And I get there and all 1,000 lights were stuck in customs. So what happens is we feel like a failure, like, oh, what am I going to do? But I had 3 lights in my suitcase. And it was those first 3 lights that showed me how Watts of Love, the foundation of Watts of Love. And I'm going to just share if that's okay. The first light that we gave was to an older woman. And thank God I didn't show up with 1,000 lights because I would have been like Oprah. Hey, you get a light and you get a light, and like just handing out these random lights, like, and everybody wanted a solar light, but who needed it? Like that was, so because I only had 3, I had to be very intentional. And so an older woman was identified. And when we went to her, we said, Nina, we're here to give you this light. She burst out crying and said, I cannot take this from you. I am too poor for you to love me. Oh. I've been cursed by God. I've been abandoned by my family, and my government doesn't know I exist. I said, no, Nina, you're seen, you're loved, you're valuable. So it was really them teaching me that the self-worth that comes from you're seen, you're loved, and you're valuable. And it's an easy transition if you look somebody in the eye and you're intentional. So that's one of the pillars of Watts of Love. The second light was to a woman who was a mother of 7. And her name was Emily. And I went down, gave her the light. The next morning, I thought, what's it like to live in complete darkness? And some random stranger shows up with a solar light, right? And you have to understand, back at that time, there was no solar lights. Like, they had never seen anything like this. This was like an alien showing up, like a lightsaber sword, or like, I mean, it was that foreign. So I ran down to her house the next morning. I said, Emily, how was your night? She said, it was fantastic. I stayed up and I made 1,000 bamboo barbecue sticks. Again, her teaching me that when the light comes and shines in a home, that illumination creates opportunity. It's opportunity for her to become a businesswoman. And that opportunity, she's not sitting in the dark. Her children can study. I mean, there's safety, security. It's this massive ripple effect. They can see each other eating dinner. They're not sitting in the dark. The wind blows, it blew out a candle. Well, you don't have unlimited matches when you're in ultra poverty. So again, realizing this illumination and opportunity that comes with it. And then the third light was to a woman who had no formal education. Her husband said, do not speak to my wife, only speak to me. And he had shared that night for dinner, they licked their fingers, dipped their fingers in salt, and rubbed salt on their tongues to trick their body into the fact that they had no food. So I tell you that story because we gave the light. I came back to the United States. 30 days later, the 1,000 lights were released. My partners called me and said, what are we going to do with all these lights? You better come back here. And I went back. And when I was on the island, that uneducated woman who I was not allowed to speak to came down from the mountaintop. And she said, Nancy, I want you to know My family has never gone hungry one day since we've received this light. I said, I don't understand. How has this light been able to feed your family? And she said, every day I hide a little bit of money from my husband. So I'm like, oh my gosh, we live so differently. But we all want to be able to care for our family. We all want to be able to feed our children. We all want to become entrepreneurs. We all want to help and be successful right where we are. And that was really, those first three lights were seared in my heart, the pillars of Watts of Love, and I knew how to move forward and steward this vision that God had given me. So that's really like the foundation. And, you know, you asked me, like, how have we gotten to where we are? Because we have a practical tool and a practical teaching of empowerment, right? So people focus on our light. Our light's amazing. But it's really how we make people feel, and it's our empowerment model that's the tipping point for families to become successful. And the light just becomes a tool, right? You send your children to school and you give them a book. It's not the book that's changing their life, it's the teaching, and it's the book. It's the same thing. It's our teaching, and then the light in the box, and you know what we've created is really the tipping point for them.
Amazing. How do you get funding, like especially in the beginning and now?
Yeah. So that was hard. It's really hard because I personally was struggling. So people would look at me and say, you need help. What are you doing? What are you doing? And so it was really the opposite. And I had to be very careful because I'm like, God, if this is really you, like, I can't go to my friends and family. They know me, they know my situation. And that fear of like, oh, what is Nancy going to go to the Philippines? Like, you know, I was making up stories in fear, like to hold me back. And I was really blessed to have pastors and people in my life that allowed me to speak outside of my circle. No, my circle, some people came alongside of us. But I spoke at churches. I was introduced to different people on the radio. So sometimes I would speak on the radio. There was just different things like that, different doors that were opened. And I'm so passionate about it that I think that comes through, but also God is more passionate than I am. So he finds a way for those relationships to happen. And obviously I have, you know, he can't drive a parked bus. I have to move. I have to drive. I have to engage. So it's challenging, but you just take the next step.
Got it. So when you're going back and forth to the Philippines, how old are your boys at this point?
Yes. So my sons were young. My youngest was about 7 years old. So 7, maybe 5, 9. So and then I had a couple in high school, grade school. So they were younger, and in a year later, after the first year of Lots of Love, and you know, it was just really just starting. It was very, very, very slow moving. I felt like God wanted them to fall in love with people, because here their mom was a stay-at-home mom. Life looked like it was changing. I didn't want them, because I was in the Philippines right after Typhoon Yolanda. And so I wanted them to understand, like, these aren't just random people that we're impacting, and they needed to be part of the solution. So in 2014, I shared with the pastor, like, I feel like God wants me to bring the kids. And he said, Nancy, I have seen the impact. I believe so much in this call that I'm going to sponsor your 5 children to come, which I didn't even, like, that wasn't even on my radar. And so I packed up my children on spring break and we went to the Philippines and we lived on this remote island where my children didn't have running water. They didn't have electricity, very little English. And we lived there for 7 days. It changed their life. My youngest son came home one day, because he'd get up at, 5 o'clock in the morning, the roosters would be going and he'd be off like, and they didn't worry about language. Like the kids just played in, the water, whatever they were doing. And he said, Mom, I went to my friend's house and they have dirt floors. And they didn't have all the walls. They had maybe 3 walls for their house. And their house was almost like a chicken coop. Like if you pictured a chicken coop, that's kind of what their house looked like. And so it's really eye-opening for my children. And I feel like it was foundational with who they are. And it has shown them that their mother had a dream and a vision from God and moved forward. So I've always encouraged them to trust that God will take care of it. If he's given you the vision, he'll show you the way.
That's beautiful. I love that they were able to go and experience that. Like that's such a, especially at that like young age, what a transformative experience.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Okay. What's been some of like the most surprising or transformative aspects of your work?
Surprising. There are people, and not the ones that you would always expect, to come alongside of you and give their time, their resources, to make sure, like, any areas that there might be a gap with, right? We're running a company. It's grown to that size and that scale. And people coming alongside and saying, okay, I see there are gaps here. This is my gifting. Not only that, but I'm going to financially support you. I'm going to help you create a board that's like the willingness to share their time and then invest because they believe in the vision. I have been radically blessed beyond belief by people who, and to this day, continue to say, I'm in. And they're not just a little in, like they're in. So, and that's how you move the needle, right? It's not just one person. Like this, there's a billion people living without lighting. Like this is potentially, it is the quickest, fastest way to raise families out of poverty. I know it. I have data. I can prove it. This is not my burden to carry alone. This is something collectively that we can all radically have an impact, and it's direct and immediate to the people living in ultra poverty, like less than 90 cents a day.
What? Okay, let's go this. I'm like, oh, we could go so many different ways. No, there's so many questions. Can you share a story of how you've seen God move in a circumstance that seemed just like impossible?
God, it would have been impossible. There's so many.
I mean, you could share a few if you want, like whatever.
Well, I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go back to the very beginning of Lots of Love, because when I would hear people at a conference or a stage talking about what they do, and I would look at them and I'd think, how are you a mother? How are you a wife? How are you running this global non-for-profit? How are you raising money? How are you living on faith? Like just like I'm a very like I want to know the details. I want to understand the steps. And I used to go and listen and I couldn't quite figure it out. And I remember one time like I'm done going to conferences until I have my own story. Because if I don't activate what I'm hearing them say, I'm wasting their time and I'm wasting my time and God's time. The point of the conference is to be activated and do something. So I came home. It was like 2014, 15, and I was like, okay, I'm all in. I had like a little small part-time job, maybe 10 hours a week. I quit it, which we needed it. I quit that because I'm like, okay, I was half in, half out. How am I going to do this? Nobody's getting paid. We didn't have insurance. Like it was rough with 5 kids, right? And I went to Amy Lancaster. I had met her and I was driving home from Florida and I stopped at her where she works and her ministry. And she was walking through and she's like, this whole building, where she had a YMCA, she said, no, Jackson gave this to us for $1. The Lord just gave us to it. And I'm like, the Lord just gave you a building. I'm like, when did God start handing out buildings? Like this was all new to me. But I heard her. I saw the fruit in her life. And I believed it to be true I'm like, well, God, I think loves me just as much as he loves Amy. So I'm going to believe this for myself. And at that point is when I was leaving my part-time job. I was kind of going to my ex-husband's office. So I was like the wife who was showing up. And a building came on the market in downtown Downers Grove, close to my children. And I'm like, I am going to believe that God's going to give us this building. And, we were talking to the man who was selling it. And he's like, absolutely not. Like, I am not giving you this building. But I firmly believed that we were supposed to have this building. It's in downtown Downers Grove. It's fabulous. And he wound up giving us that building. And so I think what God does is he allows us to hear big reach stories, but then we have to be activated and we have to be our own voice. And we have to allow the opportunity for God to move. So we received a building. People have donated cars when I needed cars. Our car got stolen. Like there are radical favor that and so what did I learn? How to live on faith. How to trust God when it absolutely seemed impossible for my family, right? And I think sometimes you could take a little bit more risk when it has to do with fundraising or things like that. But this was risk with my family. This was risk with like insurance, all of those things. And God really showed up powerfully.
That's amazing. So you're still in downtown Downers Grove?
I have the most incredible building in the world. It's adorable. It's right in downtown Downers Grove. The train goes by there, so 80,000 people a day see a big sign called Watts of Love. And for me, it has taught me and gives me something to talk about as far as People will say to me, Nancy, you can't give the light for free. People will never appreciate it. And I understand why they say that. And I agree with it to a degree. But I can tell you, I walk in that building every single day and I appreciate it. And I am grateful beyond belief. And the fact that he didn't say, hey, you owe me, you need to pay me back to appreciate this, changed my perspective. And so I believe it's the way in which Watts of Love presents our light. It's how we make people feel you're seen, you're loved, and you're valuable, and you can transform your lives. That they respect and honor the opportunity that lays ahead of them, just like I did.
Amazing. How many lights are you giving out annually at this point?
So this is what's so exciting. We have distributed, I think, in since 2013, over 165,000 homes. We have impacted over 500,000 people. I can tell you we are in a massive upswing because of empowering the local people, the solution, the monitoring and evaluation that we have, the data that we can back all of this up. The next step for Watts of Love is proving this impact, and that is highly scalable. And I believe in the next 5 years that we will light the majority of Malawi for the people, the 70% of the people who live on less than 90 cents a day. Yeah.
How many team members do you have?
Yeah, so we have about 8 people in the Downers Grove office. I have quite a few volunteers that come in on a daily basis, again, willing to give their time, their energy, and their resources. One of my favorite things about Watts of Love is we don't have international employees, but when we go into a community, whoever we partner with, we say, okay, for the next 4 years, Watts of Love, if we do our job in fundraising, we will be coming back to you every year, and we will be giving you 5,000 lights over the year for 4 years. So that's 20,000 homes. So that's called a Watts of Love Lighthouse. Okay, it's a 4-year commitment, 20,000 lights. And the special part of that is that we raise up local leadership. So we get 12 people, local leaders. So it's women with no formal education who were living with their children, like horrible situations. But what I want is for them to learn soft skills, public speaking, how to organize a group, how to distribute, how to create a list, and for them to become the role model for other women in their community. And that's how you're going to start. In order to change a community, it has to start within the home. Most community approaches start with, like, let's build a school, which they need schools. I'm not saying that they don't. But if you can't feed your children, no matter how nice your school is, they're not going. So our goal is to make the family successful right where they are, give them the light and the education so that they can start creating wealth for themselves through chickens and goats and not paying for kerosene. So they, within 7 days, they can start doing those first steps. Now they have the money and the resources to pay for the education, to pay for the books. So, yeah.
How do you find and establish international partners?
How do we find? So it's really just through relationships, especially at the beginning. And now it's like organically happening. With this scaling initiative, right, and the local people, what I'm realizing a few years ago, like we would work with pastors and NGO, non-governmental agencies, and maybe a government official. Like there was all different types of partnerships that we would have. But a few years ago, I kept running into all of these nuns throughout wherever I was. I'm like, this is so weird. Like, why am I running into all of these nuns? For the first 10 years, like I never ran into them. But I started praying about it and thinking about it. I'm like, okay, they live in and amongst the ultra poor. They've taken a vow of poverty. They're highly respected with all faiths, no matter what faith you are. If you have a problem, you know you can go to the nun and they're going to help you. It's God's natural distribution center because they are living in the community. I had other partners that were going into very poor communities, but again, that's an outsider coming in. I wanted somebody embedded in the community who was trustworthy, right? Because we're giving 20,000 lights. Like, this is a huge amount of money, huge power, right? Creating the list. Like, who can steward this? And so a few years ago, we started partnering and scaling with the nuns in Malawi. So they create that team of 12 people of all different faiths, but they are my head person. So that's how we're going to prove the model, is through the nuns infrastructure. Once that's proven, right now I'm speaking to the First Lady in Kenya. She has a large non-for-profit. Once we really prove that, it's a plug and play for any type of partnership, whether it's churches, NGOs, large scale. I mean, it's the program is established and proven, so it can go transfer anywhere.
Amazing. Okay. I'm like, I have multiple things in my head. First is, do you have any partners in Senegal yet?
I don't. I'm actually talking to somebody, but
Okay.
yeah.
'Cause I might have connections, but that's
Right?
where my from. He has family, he knows people in politics and like all over. So
Great. Let's do it.
yeah, that'd be cool. Have you had any issues, like you were mentioning the like huge amount of lights that you're sending? It's a big investment. Have you had any issues with theft or anything like that? Because I'm just thinking, because we run businesses in Senegal, and my husband's like, we have to trust whoever's on the
Oh, yeah.
ground because that like there's a lot of stories.
Oh, there's always shenanigans, right? We're human. So I can tell you, we have almost been 100% successful in Malawi. Now, through customs, there may have been, they would open up to see what was inside and they'd take one or two, not the whole shipment. And, we reported those things and that's stopped. But you could see somebody knew what was in there and they were starting to get a little creative. And, our goal is to make people successful and not tempt them. So it's a hard thing, but we've had really good partners. They report back to us. We have checks and balances, and that's just it. Is you have to make sure that when you come in and start lighting entire communities, that it's not used for political favor. You didn't vote for me, you don't get a light. Like, that was not how we want to do things. Like that, we have to be very careful with those partnerships. And when we have the right partnerships in place and we're not there, they're looking out for what are people saying. And so as far as the theft, we've been really successful. And we work with UPS, we're partnered with us. So we've had some really big names supporting us in these efforts and really guiding us through the process. And then on the ground, again, I think we've done a pretty good job vetting. And then if we feel like things are not, we're committing to them for 4 years, but it's not a guarantee. So if we see some things, they know there'll be a pullback.
What's been one of the biggest struggles that you faced as you continue to build this?
I think that one of the biggest sources of struggles or frustrations is you can see how quickly a family can change their life. And with the program that we have, there's almost a disconnect here in America. Like, how is that like going to help a family out of poverty? And because it takes a story, well, the illumination, they can be safety and security and businesses. And, once they receive the light, they can start putting their battery money inside of here every day. And we're teaching them how to start saving. And then in 7 days, they can open up their bank and they can buy a chicken. The chicken starts to multiply. And so there's this process that we have to educate our donors or bring them with us so they can see the impact. So I get frustrated because I see the impact and I just want to move faster. Just, yeah, so that's probably but we're building a foundation ready to scale quickly, and I believe rapidly in the next 4 to 5 years.
What will that look like for you guys to scale?
Well, so there's the non-for-profit, and when I started Watts of Love, I always believed that we would have a product potentially for sale so that it could help fund any non-for-profit has to live on donations, but that's challenging. So if you look at Goodwill, right, they help with like prisoners and reform, but they have a Goodwill stores that fuels the work that they do, or Tom Shoes, or different things, different models like that. So my goal was always how we can create a for sale revenue that funds the non-for-profit, especially good strategic people within the organization of Watts of Love. So I think that over the next couple of years will help, that some people will come alongside it. It's not I don't want to start a for-profit company, me personally, but I believe the right people will come who have wisdom and help us with that. And I believe with Watts of Love, because our solution is quick and fast, it's starting to get attention in the international market. Like, this is something unique. And if you look at climate change, can I just give you some numbers? If you're a numbers person, if we distribute 20,000 lights, which we have in communities, 20,000 lights, people in a community, so a family, spends throws away 500 batteries a year. So 500 times 20,000 is 10 million batteries are not thrown into the landfill in the first year. It's staggering. There's a tsunami of battery waste in the ultra poor because it has shifted from kerosene or candles to batteries, disposable, almost single-use batteries. They maybe last 2 to 3 nights, and they're expensive. So people are starting to see that this has a real impact in the climate. And I think that's how we're going to really start scaling this, with other local partners and other funders coming in that way.
Well, that makes sense. I'm just thinking about, like, in terms of Senegal, I don't even know if there are landfills. There's no like we
No.
didn't have stuff like that, like
There's no recycling and repurposing or
all in the ocean.
right. If you're a home in the bush, you throw it outside. You probably have a little hole in the dirt and you throw your trash in there and then you just cover it up. And then you're growing your food over that. Like, I mean, it just because we don't know what we don't know, right? And so that's just what has happened. It's 10 million in a year. It's staggering numbers. And our light that we designed should last 10 years. So over 10 years, it's crazy numbers. You know, so I'm actually going Wednesday to go into Malawi and even just looking at our lights. How can we incentivize the local people if it stops working, right? People don't necessarily recycle, but how can they repurpose it? Number one. Number two, how can we potentially incentivize them to trade their broken battery in for something new? So, right, do they we give them $1 for a new light? So there's those discussions are all happening.
How did you design the light? Is that something you got help with or you did it on your own?
Yes to both. So I was introduced to a corporation not far from my office, and I went to them and said, "Hey, I have this idea for a light. Would you be willing to help me?" And they said yes. So in the design, in my mind, it had to be for the ultra poor, right? Americans need light, but I wanted to design something for their needs. So I'll share with you, I'll just show you the light. So here's the light. My original light that I was giving was like a larger lantern and then a separate solar panel. And the solar panel had a wire that would connect to the light, like a flashlight, a larger. And what I noticed is that the mice or the rats would eat through the wires. So then it couldn't charge, or the solar panel would be stolen.
We've had that happen on our farm.
I mean, it's just right. So I thought, okay, I first saw those problems and then I designed a backpack for this two-piece unit where the solar panel sat on the outside, the light sat on the inside. There was a grommet that it would go in and charge. So when they're walking, they're subsistence farmers, they could charge the light as they were walking. I put a large zippered pocket in there and that was their bank. So I kind of designed this backpack for this larger unit. But when I started seeing all these problems, I thought, nope, it needs the light was so big that I mean, you know, it was the size of a little larger than a grapefruit. But I would look at that, I'm like, we're shipping air. How can we get more efficient and more effective and not ship air? Because I could get 12 lights in a box. With the new design, I can get 100 lights in a small box. So we got rid of the air. I put the solar panel directly on my can you see that?
Yeah, I see it.
So the solar panel is in the back, so it's directly on the light. On the front, it has a raised heart. So now people who don't have glasses, they can feel where to push, or if they're blind, they can feel. And I had this large surface push because I was in a leper colony in Kathmandu, Nepal, and nobody had fingers. So I thought, okay, I watched them struggle trying to turn our original light, like not having fingers, trying to push this button. So when I designed it, I wanted to make sure that people with different abilities were able to use it. So the push and hold was inspired by this leper colony, but you push and hold in the center. Number one will last 120 hours. You can see there were 3 green lights, and that's a battery indicator. 4 green lights means it's full. 3 is 75%, and so on. And then the second setting will last 40 hours, 30 hours, and then 10 on the brightest. And this is like 275 lumens. This would light, you could operate underneath this light. It's so bright. And then there's emergency strobe that acts like the 911. Somebody's in labor. Now you can you can let somebody know that there's a problem. it also comes with the lanyard. So now when you're walking or farming, you can either have the light facing forward or you flip it the other way. And now you have the solar panel. So it stays on their body. So it reduces theft because it's supposed to be a personal light. They can turn it up, put it on their back. So if the sun is behind them, it's directional so it can follow the sun wherever it is. It also has little clips on the side and hands-free. So it can be a headlamp or it can hang inside of your house as a chandelier.
Wow, you thought of everything.
So I did, but I felt like if we are investing in the ultra poor, it needs to be the Cartier of free lighting
Ah,
because it's a waste of time to go and give something that is going to break in a few years and it doesn't, that they're trying to hold it, they're trying to feed a baby. Like, what was their lifestyle? How do they use and incorporate light? And that was really, you know, all of those things were in my mind when we were creating this.
amazing. Yeah, because I had like the headlamps when we lived in Senegal because we would lose power
Yeah.
often. And that's way better. I was like way more uses.
Yes. Right. Your hands free. Like it's a big deal to have your hands free.
That's so cool. How have you grown as a leader, and what are some of like the biggest leadership lessons that you've learned?
Gosh, you know, I've grown so much. I stopped working when I was 28 years old, and I was a stay-at-home mom, for 17 years. So, I mean, when I left the workforce, there were no computers. So I think as a leader, surrounding yourself with really good people, valuing them, and really listening to what their passion is, because I think it's when you combine passion and purpose is that we're all going to be successful. Um, and it's challenging as a leader, right? Because you see the potential, you want, you have a budget, you have constraint, like all of those things, but just trying to figure out how can I bless my people? How can I grow the company? It's always a challenge, but finding good people and investing in them and having a vision for the future. So there's a few books. There's something called Traction, which is an excellent book for non-for-profits, or really it was designed for profits, but it's all for entrepreneurs. It's outstanding. It's something that we have incorporated at Lots of Love a few years ago. And so for any entrepreneur, anything you can read or get from Traction, it's outstanding.
Amazing. What does it mean to you to make an impact?
I'm sorry?
What does it mean to you to make an impact?
Having an impact is, for me, making a family successful exactly where they are, that they don't need to leave, and that they have the ability to create the desires and the dreams that God has put inside their heart. And so that's one of my greatest joys, is to go back and just celebrate with them. Like, we'll go back to a community for a testimony day and they get to share, I'm 56 years old. I've never had a chicken. Now I've got 10 chickens. My children are in school. And like that impact on that mother who never had a chicken and now has, I'm like, I could die today. Like, and it's the one, right? The one story, the one person, but I want to do that at scale.
Yeah. How often do you go back and like revisit the same community?
So there's never a guarantee because, right, especially as we're growing and scaling, um, it just depends. Like it's not often, but what's amazing is the communities that we've distributed light are asking for accountability. They're saying, please come back and hear what we've done. Please come and see how good we've stewarded this resource. And so if we can't, the Americans can't go to all of those communities, it's up to my local people, my local partner. We ask them to go and to check on the communities and hear and get feedback. So we're really, it's part of our process as we grow.
Amazing. Where can we connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love it. So it's our website is www.watts, WATTS, wattsoflove.org. We're also on Instagram, Facebook. So I love when people share or repost or comment. But anyway, reach out. We take global travel teams. I'll be taking a team to Kenya. Not, I won't be, but I have a team going in Kenya in March to northern Kenya, which we were there last year. It's an amazing place.
Wait, where, what city? Where in Kenya?
I don't know exactly where they're going. I'm not in all of the details, but it's
Lived
in
in northern Kenya. It was like 8 hours.
northern Liwa, Liwa.
I was in
Where?
Aua. It's outside of Meru by Mount Meru.
Okay, yeah. I'm not as familiar. I was there last year, but we'll be
That's
going back.
I love Kenya.
Yeah, I love Northern Kenya. Oh, I love Kenya. And then I will be leading a team to southern Malawi. It's called Asanji. Asanji is an area that very few tour ever go there. It's extremely remote. It's surrounded by Mozambique. I think there's one hospital for like 200 miles. Like, I mean, they had a massive hurricane last year. It was one of the largest hurricanes that sat over Asanji for like 2 days. The flooding, people, like the stories, people were living in trees, like it was horrific. So, in a year and a half, we have distributed over, I think, 12,000 families have received lights. We're really sowing into this area because it is so poor, so overlooked. If that's something that speaks to your heart, come with us the end of April.
Amazing. It's been so good to chat with you and to hear what you're up to and just part of your story. So thank you so much, Nancy, for being on the show.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me.